I was driving back home after a long trip, and it was already past midnight. The road felt endless, with no streetlights, just the sound of my engine and the wind rushing past the car. I was getting drowsy, but keeping my eyes on the dark stretch ahead kept me somewhat alert. That's when I saw something on the side of the road up ahead. A man was standing near a car with its hood popped open, frantically waving his arms. He looked hurt, and my first instinct was to hit the brakes. But something about the situation made me hesitate. It didn't feel right, but how could I ignore someone clearly in need of help? I pulled over a little ahead, keeping some distance while trying to figure out what to do. I grabbed my phone before stepping out, but of course it showed no signal. Typical for such a deserted area. I cautiously got out of my car, leaving the engine running, just in case. As I approached, I noticed the man looked terrified, glancing around like he was expecting something or someone to come out of the shadows. His expression was something I'd never seen before, a mix of pure fear and desperation. When I got close enough, he didn't ask for help with his car. Instead, he locked eyes with me and whispered, "He's coming." The way he said those words sent chills down my spine. He's coming? Who? What? Before I could ask, he stepped closer and grabbed my arm. "You need to leave now," he whispered, still darting his eyes toward the darkness surrounding the road. That's when I noticed he was trembling, and his eyes were welling up with tears. My heart started racing, and a part of me wanted to bolt back to my car, but I was frozen, trying to process what was going on. Suddenly, I heard a noise coming from the trees lining the road. It sounded like something heavy moving through the bushes, much bigger than any animal I'd expect to find out there. The man froze in place and let go of my arm, almost as if he wanted me to run first. "Don't look," he muttered. But of course, I looked. The bushes were shaking in a strange way, and the sound grew louder, like whatever it was charging straight toward us. I barely had time to react before something slammed into my car, with a force so strong it made the whole thing rock on its wheels. I nearly jumped out of my skin at the sound and instinctively ran back to my car. The man, though, stayed frozen, staring at the bushes like he was in some kind of trance. "Get in," I yelled, but it was like he couldn't hear me. I glanced at my car and saw the side was dented, like something massive had hit it, but there was nothing there. Just the empty road and the bushes, now completely still, as if everything had gone silent. Every fiber of my being was screaming at me to get out of there, but my mind was stuck, still trying to make sense of what was happening. Then something came out of the bushes, the eye. I don't know how to describe it exactly because it was dark, and my focus was on the car door I was yanking open. But whatever it was big, fast, and definitely not human. I bolted into the car, my adrenaline in overdrive, and slammed the door shut. The moment I turned the key, I heard a scream from where the man was standing, a horrible, gut-wrenching sound that made my blood run cold. I didn't look back. I just floored the gas pedal, the engine roaring as I sped away from that place as fast as I could. My mind was racing as I drove, trying to convince myself there was some logical explanation. The problem was, nothing about it made sense. The noise, the sheer force that hit my car, the man's scream, none of it was normal. After a few minutes, I realized my hands were shaking so much I could barely keep the wheel steady. I took a few deep breaths, trying to calm down, but the feeling that something was still following me wouldn't go away. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, but all I could see was the pitch-black road behind me. When I finally saw the lights of a small town in the distance, I felt a wave of relief. I pulled into the first gas station I came across, parked, and got out of the car. My legs felt like jelly. The attendant gave me a weird look, probably because I looked like I'd seen a ghost. Before I even tried to explain, I called the cops. I didn't know what to say, so I just told them I'd found a man hurt on the road and that something attacked him. While I waited, I couldn't stop staring at the dent on the side of my car. It wasn't just a dent. It looked strange, almost like it had been clawed. When the cops arrived, I tried to explain what happened, but even as I said it out loud, I realized how crazy it sounded. Something big hit my car, and the guy on the road disappeared, was all I could manage to say. The officers gave me skeptical looks, and one of them inspected the dent on my car. He muttered something about maybe a large animal like a bear, but I knew that wasn't it. There weren't any paw prints or signs of an animal. It was like the car had been smashed by something that shouldn't exist. They asked me a bunch of questions, then said they'd send a patrol to check the area where I'd seen the man. They insisted I should just go home, but I couldn't. I ended up sitting at the gas station for a few more hours, too shaken to drive. Eventually, one of the officers came back. He told me they hadn't found anything. No man, no signs of a struggle, nothing. It was as if the whole thing had never happened. The only proof I had was the damage to my car, but even that didn't tell the full story. To this day, I can't get the image of that man's terrified face, or the thing that came out of the bushes, out of my mind. We were driving back from a long trip, one of those weekends where you just try to disconnect from everything. It was late, around 10 p.m., and the GPS took us down a road that felt completely forgotten by time. There were no lights, just the car's headlights reflecting off the tall trees on either side. My boyfriend and I were quiet, too tired to talk, when we suddenly saw a pile of logs blocking the road. There was no way around them. He turned off the engine and got out to try and move the logs. I stayed in the car, but something felt off almost immediately. While he was pushing the logs, I started looking around and felt a chill run down my spine. It was this weird feeling, like we weren't alone. The wind rustled the leaves, but there was something else, a faint noise that didn't seem natural. That's when I noticed movement in the woods, like shadows darting between the trees. My heart started racing, and I barely managed to whisper his name. Then I glanced toward the side of the road and saw two figures stepping out from the forest. They were wearing hooded jackets, and even in the dark, I could feel they weren't there to help. I screamed his name as loud as I could, and he stopped what he was doing instantly. When he looked toward me, he saw the two men and immediately sprinted back to the car. There wasn't time to think, only time to hope he could make it before they did. I had already unlocked his door, and my heart was pounding so hard it hurt. The men didn't say a word, but they started moving faster toward him, like they knew they had a small window to act. He threw himself into the car, and I already had the engine running. Without hesitation, he yelled at me to floor it, and that's exactly what I did. I drove right over the broken branches and what was left of the logs, hearing the wood crack and scrape against the bottom of the car. All I wanted was to get out of there. But as I sped down the road, I glanced in the rearview mirror. The two men were standing in the middle of the road, just staring at us as we disappeared into the night. For a few minutes, we drove in complete silence, trying to process what had just happened. We started questioning if we had somehow made a mistake by taking that route. The GPS still showed we were on track, but nothing about it felt right. The road was practically abandoned. All we could do was keep going. But every sound from the engine or the branches crunching under the tires felt way louder than it should. My boyfriend was trying to act calm, but I could see his hands shaking on the wheel. I couldn't get the image of those two hooded men out of my head. The way they appeared so suddenly without making a sound and just stood there as we drove off. It was haunting. I kept looking in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see headlights or something coming after us, but there was nothing, just the dark road behind us, and the sound of our car struggling over the rough patches. All I knew was that I wouldn't feel safe until we reached the city. The road felt endless, like we were stuck in some loop that wouldn't let us escape. Every turn we took felt like another chance for something to go wrong. I kept checking the GPS, and it said we were about 15 minutes away from a main highway, but those 15 minutes felt like hours. The feeling of being watched hadn't gone away, and it was eating at me. It was like something unseen was out there just waiting for the right moment. Then, out of nowhere, there was this loud metallic sound, like something had hit the side of the car. My heart jumped into my throat. "What was that?" my boyfriend asked, but I couldn't even form words to answer. We looked around but couldn't see anything. Without slowing down, he pressed harder on the gas, speeding up despite the bumps and branches on the road. The adrenaline was taking over, and all we could focus on was getting out of there. The tension was so thick it felt like we couldn't even breathe. Finally, we saw a sign for the main highway, and I felt a wave of relief mixed with dread, like something bad could still happen before we reached it. Those last few meters felt like a lifetime. The moment we hit the highway, my boyfriend floored it, like we were still running from something. I glanced in the rearview mirror one last time, and the dark, empty road behind us seemed to swallow everything. There was no sign of anyone or anything, but the fear hadn't left me. We got home in the early hours of the morning, but neither of us could relax. We spent hours replaying what had happened, trying to make sense of it, but there were no answers. Who were those men? How did they know someone would come down that road? To this day, we still don't have a clue. But one thing's for sure. We'll never take a shortcut down an unfamiliar road again. That night left a mark on both of us, one we'll never forget. Look, I've been through a lot on the road in my 25 years as a truck driver. Storms, nasty accidents, even a few close calls with robberies. But nothing, and I mean nothing, prepared me for what happened on my last trip. I was on a night route as usual. I always preferred driving at night. Less traffic, quieter. That day it was pouring rain and I knew the roads could be slippery. My truck was fully loaded, and stopping quickly was never an easy task with that much weight. Still, I felt like I had things under control. That was, until I saw something that shook me to my core. Out of nowhere, in the middle of the darkness and rain, my headlights lit up a girl standing in the road. She wasn't moving, just standing there barefoot, wearing this soaked white nightgown. My reflexes kicked in, and I slammed on the brakes, but the truck skidded on the wet asphalt. I felt the impact, there was no mistaking it. It wasn't a small bump, it was like I had hit someone. My heart felt like it stopped, and the only thing going through my head was, oh my God, I just ran someone over. I stopped the truck immediately and ran out into the rain to check, but there was no one there. No body, no sign of anyone at all. Still trying to make sense of what happened, I grabbed the flashlight I always keep in the truck and started looking around. The rain made it hard to see much, but I searched for skid marks, blood, anything to prove I hadn't lost my mind. There was nothing. The road was slick, untouched, and even the muddy shoulder didn't have a single footprint. My mind was racing, trying to come up with a logical explanation. Maybe she managed to get up and run off? But why would someone be out there, in the middle of nowhere, barefoot and in a nightgown? I got back in the truck, soaked and shaking, trying to convince myself it was just my imagination. But as soon as I opened the door, my stomach dropped. There she was, standing right next to the truck just a few feet away. The same girl staring straight at me. She didn't say anything, didn't move, just stood there with this empty expression that chilled me to my core. I froze for a second, then my instincts kicked in. I jumped into the cab, locked the doors, and started the engine. I took off as fast as I could without even looking back. As I drove, my heart was pounding so hard, it felt like it was about to burst out of my chest. My hands were slick with sweat, even though it was freezing outside and the rain kept hammering against the windshield. I kept glancing in the rearview mirrors, half expecting to see her again, but there was nothing. Just the dark, empty road and the glare of the headlights reflecting off the wet asphalt. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. You know that gut feeling, like someone's watching you? That's exactly how I felt, and it was nearly impossible to focus on driving. After about 15 minutes of driving, I saw the lights of a gas station up ahead. It felt like a lifeline because I needed to stop, catch my breath, and figure out what the hell was going on. I pulled in, parked, and climbed out of the truck, my legs still shaky. I went straight to the counter to grab a coffee. A few other truckers were hanging out nearby, so I decided to share what had just happened, half expecting them to laugh it off or tell me I was just seeing things. But what they said next made my blood run cold. One of the truckers, an older guy with a gray beard and a rough demeanor, looked at me seriously and asked, Was it near mile marker 237? I nodded, and he let out this deep sigh. You're not the first to see that girl. There've been stories about her for years. Always the same, standing in the road, barefoot like she's lost. But no one's ever been able to explain what it is or why she's there. Another trucker chimed in, almost whispering. They say a girl was hit and killed there years ago, but they never found her body. That hit me like a punch to the gut. My hands were shaking so bad I almost spilled my coffee. I wanted to believe it was just some urban legend they told to mess with newbies, but everything I had seen that night lined up perfectly with what they were saying. I didn't say another word. I just went back to my truck, my mind racing. Before leaving, I glanced at my side mirror, hoping not to see anything, but something caught my eye. There was a strange mark on the side of the truck, like someone had wiped their hand along the wet surface. My stomach twisted. The rain hadn't let up, but the mark was fresh, like it had just been made. At that point, the exhaustion and fear hit me harder than anything else. I knew that Mark shouldn't have been there, but I didn't have the nerve to step out and take a closer look. I turned the engine back on and hit the road, determined to get as far away from that stretch as I possibly could. But even as the empty highway stretched out ahead of me, I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't over. It felt like something, or someone, was following me, even if I couldn't see it. When I finally reached my destination hours later, I was completely drained, mentally and physically. I handed off the delivery and made the decision right then and there that this would be my last trip. To this day, I can't explain what happened that night. I've avoided that stretch of road ever since, and whenever I hear other truckers share stories about it, I keep my mouth shut. But every time I hear the sound of tires skidding on wet pavement during a storm, I see her face again, standing there in the rain like she's still waiting for someone. Me and Daniel carpooled to work almost every day. It was convenient and cheap since he lived about 10 minutes from my house, and we worked in the same direction. That day, we were running late because of traffic, so Daniel suggested cutting through an old road he knew. It wasn't paved and looked like it hadn't been used in years, but he swore it would save us 20 minutes. At first, I wasn't sure about it, but he insisted, and I gave in. The road was completely deserted, with trees almost swallowing the sky above us. There wasn't another car in sight, just the crunch of gravel beneath the tires and an unsettling silence. Halfway down the road, we saw something on the shoulder. It was a dusty, torn backpack lying there, looking like it had been abandoned. Daniel pulled over, curious. I told him we shouldn't mess with it, but he figured it might belong to a lost hiker or something. When he opened it, I instantly regretted not arguing harder. Inside were clothes, but they were stained with what looked like blood. There was also a phone, cracked and powered off. We froze for a moment, not knowing what to do. With no cell service in the area, we decided to take the backpack to the police when we got back to town. It seemed like the right thing to do, but looking back, it was probably the worst decision we could have made. Daniel tossed the backpack into the back seat and we kept driving. The further we went, the more isolated the road felt. No houses, no streetlights, just endless trees. My anxiety was building and I couldn't stop thinking about those bloody clothes. I tried coming up with logical explanations. Maybe they belonged to a hunter or some kind of stage prop, but none of it made sense. Then we noticed headlights in the rearview mirror. A truck was coming up fast behind us, its engine roaring louder with every second. Within minutes, the truck was tailgating us, honking aggressively and flashing its high beams. Daniel tried to brush it off, saying, "Maybe they just want to pass." But even when he slowed down to let them, the truck didn't overtake us. Instead, it stayed right on our bumper, getting more aggressive. The tension in the car was thick. Daniel decided to speed up, trying to put some distance between us, but the truck matched every move. That's when it hit me. This wasn't normal. Something was very, very wrong. Daniel floored it, but the narrow, winding road made it hard to gain much distance. The trees on both sides felt like they were closing in, and the sound of the truck's engine was deafening. I turned around to look, but I couldn't make out the driver's face through the glare of their headlights. All I could see were at least 2 figures in the cab. "This isn't right, Daniel," I said, my voice shaking. He didn't respond, just gripped the steering wheel tighter, his jaw clenched. Suddenly, the truck sped up and tried to swerve in front of us. Daniel barely managed to avoid it, the car skidding dangerously close to the edge of the road. As we regained control, we saw the truck stop ahead, completely blocking the road. There was no way around it. "Now what?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Daniel scanned the surroundings looking for another way out, but the trees boxed us in on all sides. Then the truck's door swung open. 2 men climbed out. They weren't wearing anything unusual, but one of them was holding what looked like a metal pipe or some kind of rod. My stomach dropped. "We need to turn around. Now," I whispered urgently. Before Daniel could react, the men started walking toward us. Daniel quickly threw the car into reverse and tried to turn it around, but the road was so narrow that every move felt painfully slow. The men broke into a sprint, and I could hear their footsteps crunching the gravel. Just as one of them got close enough to swing at the car, Daniel slammed the gas, and we sped backward, almost veering off into the ditch. The tires screeched as we managed to get the car facing the other way, and Daniel took off down the road, the truck now chasing after us again. The engine roared behind us, getting closer with every second. We drove as fast as the road would let us, the car bouncing violently over the loose gravel and potholes. I kept glancing back, expecting to see the truck ram into us at any moment. "They're not giving up," I yelled, gripping the dashboard. Daniel didn't say a word, just kept his eyes on the road, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. Then up ahead we saw a turnoff to the right, barely visible through the overgrown trees. "Turn there!" I shouted. Without hesitation, Daniel swerved, almost losing control as we sped down the even narrower path. For a moment I thought we might have shaken them off, but I wasn't ready to feel safe just yet. For a few minutes it felt like we had lost them. The forest around us was eerily quiet, and the only sounds were the engine humming and the crunch of gravel under the tires. I was still staring out the back window, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it might burst. Daniel slowed down slightly, but his grip on the wheel didn't loosen. "You think they're gone?" he asked, barely audible. I didn't answer. Something about the silence felt wrong. Then, as if on cue, I saw headlights cutting through the trees behind us. My stomach sank. They had found us. Daniel cursed under his breath and hit the gas again. The road was even worse than the last one, full of deep ruts and sharp turns. Every bump made it feel like the car was about to fall apart. The truck was closing in, its headlights lighting up the inside of our car like floodlights. "They're not stopping," I muttered, my voice cracking. Daniel didn't respond. He was too focused on keeping us on the road. I turned back again and saw the truck barreling down on us, its horn blaring like some kind of twisted warning. Then we saw it, a barricade up ahead, made of branches and rocks. Daniel slammed the brakes and the car skidded to a stop just inches from the pile. Before we could react, 2 men came out of the trees on either side of the road. It was them, the same ones from earlier. One of them was carrying that pipe again, and the other was already rushing toward the car. "Go, go!" I screamed, but there was nowhere to go. Daniel threw the car into reverse, but before he could move, the man with the pipe smashed it against the hood, leaving a huge dent. The other one yanked at the passenger side door, trying to pull it open. I held the handle with everything I had, my hands shaking. Daniel managed to jerk the car backward, and the sudden motion made the man lose his grip. He hit the gas again, and we tore down the road, the car bouncing violently over the uneven ground. I could hear the men yelling behind us, but I didn't dare look back. Every instinct in me was screaming to get as far away as possible. The barricade, the truck, the men. It all felt like some kind of trap we had walked right into, and I wasn't sure we'd make it out alive. The car felt like it was barely holding together as we sped down the path. Every jolt and bump made me think the wheels were going to give out. Daniel didn't slow down, even as the road got narrower and the trees seemed to close in around us. I kept glancing back, terrified that the truck would appear again, but all I could see was darkness. "Just keep going," I whispered. as if saying it out loud would somehow keep us safe. My heart was racing so hard it felt like my chest might burst. Finally, after what felt like hours but was probably just a few minutes, the dirt road opened up onto a paved highway. The sight of the asphalt under the headlights was like a lifeline. Daniel didn't hesitate. He turned onto the highway and floored it, his eyes darting to the rear-view mirror every few seconds. I looked back too, expecting to see the truck barreling out of the trees behind us. But it didn't. The road behind us was empty. It was like they had stopped at the edge of the forest, unwilling or unable to follow us any further. We drove in silence for a while, neither of us daring to say anything. My hands were still shaking and I felt like I couldn't catch my breath. Eventually, we reached a small town and spotted a police station. We pulled into the lot and practically stumbled out of the car. Daniel grabbed the backpack from the back seat and we went inside to report what had happened. The officer on duty didn't seem particularly alarmed about the bloody clothes or the cracked phone. He took our statement and said they'd look into it, but his dismissive tone made it clear he didn't take us seriously. As we left the station, I couldn't shake the feeling that we had narrowly escaped something far worse than we realized. To this day, I have no idea who those men were or what they wanted, and honestly, I don't think I want to know. All I know is that I'll never take a shortcut like that again, no matter how much time it might save. If you enjoyed the stories, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel to support our work, and never miss the next ones. Thank you.